of identifying processes and use cases for the business, to figure out how to use use case diagrams to capture that, maybe also activity diagrams to understand the rules and style guidelines for activity diagrams, understand how to create use case diagrams and what those rules and guidelines are, and then eventually to be able to create functional models of business processes using these diagrams and the use case descriptions. So we've already talked about this in class, but the idea is to turn the requirements, the things we have to do for the system, into functional models. So the models are logical, so they're independent about how they're implemented. Developing use cases is a way to figure out how the business system interacts with its environment, and it includes both a description and a diagram to indicate the particular activities that the users perform. Activity diagrams model how the business operates, and they can be used to illustrate the movement of data, objects, between the different activities. So these are the elements of a use case. Actors are the stick figures. Sometimes you use the stereotype actor on a box like in the right hand side there, right over here. Associations are lines drawn to connect actors and use cases. There are interactions, inclusions, extensions, or generalizations. The use case, this is the major process in the system that gives benefit to the users, the functional requirement. There's a box around the use cases and separating the use cases from the actors, which is the scope of the system. And then the association links actors with use cases. There's also an include relationship, which says that some functionality of the subsidiary use case is used by another use case. And there's an extension relationship, which represents the potentially optional behavior of a use case. Sometimes you have related use cases related by inheritance, and there's the generalization relationship to diagram arrow to show that. So how do you identify the major use cases? Review the requirements, identify the boundaries, find the primary actors and what their goals are, identify the business processes and the major use cases within that, and then review the set out use cases, maybe split or combine to get them the right size, and potentially identify additional use cases. We already did this in class, at least with the with 3301, right? We showed how the original statement of the order pizza quickly system was a little too simple, and we added lots of stuff in terms of use cases and external actors that we needed in order to make the system work properly. So create a use case diagram. Place and draw the use cases, place and draw the actors, draw the system boundary, add the associations. And here's an example, right? We've got library book collection management system. We've got a librarian and a borrower as the external actors, and we've got various use cases. Oh, there's two other computer-based actors. There's the personnel office and the registrar office. And the major use cases are process overdue books, maintain book collection, borrow books, search collection, and return books. We've already done quite a bit on use cases, so I'm not going to go too much. We haven't done much on activity diagrams, and let's talk about those now. The aim is to capture what the business is doing in order to create value. And they model behavior independent of objects and can be used for just about any type of process. These are the parts of the activity diagram. There's the activity, the control flow, which shows the sequence of operation. There's the initial node, which is just a blue dot. There's a final node, which is where everything stops, and that's a blue dot surrounded by a lighter coloured annulus. And there's a decision node. Right? Activities and actions. Sometimes these are performed for a specific business reason. Usually they have a verb and a noun, and activities can be potentially further subdivided, but actions can't. Object nodes represent the flow of information from one activity to the other. Control flows show the execution path. Object flows show the model the flow of objects, and then we've got control nodes. Initial nodes, final activity nodes, final flow node, decision node, merge node, fork node, and join node. Right, and that's the list of all the symbols that you should use on an activity diagram. I'm not going to read through them all in detail. Let's see what we've got to talk about. Right, so here's an example. As you can see at the top, we've got the solid dot saying where to start. At the bottom, we've got the dot with the white annulus around it to indicate where we finish. And here we have lots of decisions to be made, indicated by the white diamonds. And we've got over here, we've got the information that has to flow around the system, right? This is how we get from here to here, or from here to here, but we need to have extra information, and that's what that appointment request info box is doing. Sometimes it's useful to identify the roles or the actors that are executing a particular part of the activity diagram. And the way we do this is by using what are called swim lanes. Right? And you can see how the two swim lanes in this example. There's two parents, a first parent and a second parent. And we have to do two things in parallel. We can do two things in parallel with each parent. And one of the parents is creating the sandwich, and the other one is getting the extra pieces for the lunch, the drink and the dessert. And then once they've both finished, down here, the second parent has to assemble it all together, get a lunchbox, and put the lunch in the lunchbox. Right? So the guidelines for activity diagrams: set the scope, identify the activities and connect them with flows, find any decisions that must be made and call them out with guard conditions, identify potential parallelism in the process, and then draw the activity diagram. It's often helpful to use a well-known business process and review the requirements before you do the activity diagram. You've got to figure out what the set of activities for the process are, what the control flows and nodes are, what the object flows and the nodes between which the objects flow are, and then you lay out the diagram. So use cases are very important from my perspective because of this top line. They're the primary driver for where you start talking about a system using UML. It depicts all the activities performed by the user. and the functions of the system. They're the functional requirements. And you need to make sure that each use case describes one and only one function. Here's a way of categorizing use cases: overview and detail regarding the amount of information and what their purpose is, whether they're essential or whether they're real. Right? And we've already gone through the pieces of the template that we're using in use cases, so I'm not going to talk too much about those. Here's some nice guidelines. Write in the form of subject, verb, direct object. Make it very clear who starts the step. Write everything from an independent observer's perspective, not from inside the system. Try to keep everything at the same level of abstraction. Make sure the steps that you're using are sensible, and apply keeping it simple often. And when you need to repeat stuff, you can either pull it out into a subflow and say that it's repeated, or say that the repetition happens within the sequence. Right, and I'm not going to read through this. We've already done this exercise, but I suggest you have a read through to see if there's anything that you may have missed. Here's an example regarding what the borrow books use case that we saw in a previous diagram. So you want to make sure that the requirements are right. So validating and verifying use cases are important. You want to do it before you go too much further along in the scheme of things. So you want to review all the models and diagrams created so far. You want to see what is performed by individuals, and it helps having a walkthrough, so a review of what's happening. Ensure there's one recorded event in the flows of a use case, right, for each activity, action or activity on the activity diagram. All the objects in an activity diagram must be mentioned in an event of the use case description. The sequence of the use case description should match the sequence on the activity diagram. There shouldn't be any contradictions. One and only one description for each use case. All actors listed in the use case description must be shown on the diagram. Stakeholders listed in the use case description must be shown on the use case diagram. All relationships in the use case description must be depicted on the use case diagram, and all diagram-specific rules should be enforced. Okay, we've talked about that pretty quickly, but it's basically about use case diagrams and activity diagrams, and how we need to use those to analyze the requirements that we're coming up with for the system.